In 1988, Bob Lazar was recommended for a job by his colleague Edward Teller to work for a company called EG&G. He was now being hired to join the U.S. Air Force as a scientist working at a site called Area 51, which was close to Nellis Air Force Base, located in the middle of nowhere in Nevada, a location that was very far from prying eyes. On his first day, Lazar was driven to the base after a flight and taken to where he would be working, an outpost facility known as S4. Inside this airplane hangar, built into the side of a mountain, was a flying saucer, which would now be his responsibility to study and reverse engineer its secrets for the sake of the United States of America. Serving for several months, Lazar walked by a room one day where he saw a gray alien being interrogated by military officials. Curious, he later organized trips with friends and family to trespass on the base, where he claimed to see UFOs landing at the base, until their third trespassing trip, where they were discovered by guards and forced away. The following day, Lazar found that he had lost his job and was now at the precipice of the point where he would have to make a decision. Would he remain silent, or would he become the whistleblower the American people needed to reveal the truth at Area 51? Organizing an interview with the local TV station, Lazar revealed his truth, creating a media frenzy and allowing the world to hear the name Area 51 for the first time. Here we have one of the most compelling mysteries of history and what would become part of the UFO mythos and the conspiracies revolving around Area 51, which we will be discussing tonight on Friday Night Frights. I'm your host, Christian Ashley of Systematic Geekology, here to terrify and instruct you all on the weird, unusual, fascinating, fantastical, and unexplainable things that may or may not lurk out there in the world. I am joined by my co-host, Joe Day. How's it going, Joe?
It is another month and time to talk about even more spooky nonsense.
Absolutely. I am so ready for this ridiculous story that I find appealing in many different ways to be discussed tonight. So I'm very interested to see what you have to say. I am not prepared for what's going to come out of that mouth tonight.
So the question is really, are you ever? Yeah, this is. Area 51 is one of those things where I think it's fun to kick the can around. It's fun to explore because it's been a part of the sci-fi paranormal zeitgeist for so long.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those, like, as soon as you get into ufology, even if you've never even studied it, you've heard the name Area 51 for some way, through popular media, or just hearing every now and then there'll be a news report saying, Pentagon says nothing going on at Area 51, or we had the most recent debacle, which we'll get to later on with the Storm Area 51, which, man, they can't stop us all, except they did.
Yeah, except for like 2 people showed up. That was absurd.
So, guys, just as a reminder, our schedule is to once a month cover one of 6 categories: cryptozoology, the paranormal, religious strangeness, the weird and the unexplained, true crime, and ufology. We are now at ufology, and after this, we'll be going back to cryptozoology, and we'll be discussing what Joe has picked to do next time when we get to the end of this episode. So, you kind of brought it up, but what's your history with Area 51, Joe?
2 words. I mean, I guess 1 letter and 1 word. X-Files. So I'm of that generation where X-Files and Unsolved Mysteries and different stuff like that was like really big. And then when I was a teenager, for those of you that don't know, History Channel After Dark in the early 2000s was a wild place. And so of course Ancient Aliens and all of that. And so I would say my experience with Area 51 is that I'm not as into it as some of my UFO friend, like ancient alien theorist friends and all of that sort of stuff. But it's certainly something that I, you grow up with this stuff and it becomes like more of like a fantasy thing to talk about unless you're, as you're watching this stuff, but like there's actual history at the site, and to see what I think it's interesting what how much like mysterious, like how everything is like there's a mystique to it,
Yeah, I grew up around that same time. I did not watch the X-Files when I was young because I was a weenie little baby who just couldn't take horror at the time. Had to grow up a bit to appreciate that.
Yeah.
And then watch stuff like the X-Files. But yeah, but that part of history too, it just kind of was just in the cultural zeitgeist of plenty of things bringing up not only are there aliens, but there's a place where the U.S. government is in contact with them in this obscure base in Nevada. And that's where they've had clandestine meetings. And that's where we studied the crash ship at Roswell, which we'll discuss later, kind of became part of the mythos after the fact because no one cared about Roswell until the 80s. Yep. It was just kind of one of those things where it's just like, oh, yeah, that's the thing that happened in like a UFO footnote book. And that'd be it. And we've made it way more important than it used to be.
Yeah, I think.
Are you about to say something?
I think the thing about Area 51 is, I think in the grand scheme of things, it would be remembered as the vessel for how many things got poured into it, rather than like a specific definitive smoking gun of sorts, as far as contact with another people, another race, whatever, like another, like aliens, that sort of thing. Because of all of the mystique, because of all of the intrigue, because of all of the different mediums and different avenues that have taken this story and used it to pour in, and I mean this from everything from things like the X-Files, things that are very much like sci-fi, very much like there was even a before shows like Teen Wolf or whatever, like the sci-fi like before that was ever a thing, you had Roswell, which followed an alien. Like this was there were a lot of different forms of, we're using this to tell like a fantasy story. And then you had the people who used it to pour in some really unfortunate stances, and people that use it as a means to get their point across. What that point is matters not. That's not really, like, it can be whatever it pleases because of the mystique and the intrigue, like I said. And so when you look at Area 51 and the fact that for some people, I'm about to blow your collective minds. Ready? Hold on to your knickers, because Area 51 and Roswell are not the same thing. Some people think that it's just become all part of the same deal, right? And so
yep.
I think it's fascinating to look into, because whole schools of thought that, like you said, all of it, right? You laid it out, and I could hear the tongue in cheek, tongue firmly in your cheek, the whole 9 yards, and the way that you were describing it, and all of that. But some people listen to what you just said and were like, "Yep, yeah, that's the beginning of the tale." You know what I mean? So totally at some point, you got to look at the grand total of it and be like, okay, what does this say about the situation? Like, are you willing to at least endeavor the conversation of, does this mean that life outside of Earth exists? Or are you willing to articulate the fact that, guys, humans have been known to be raging marks that will fall for any manner of nonsense, but we'll get there.
Yes. Yeah, this is a good litmus test for how much people have actually researched it. and how many people have actually researched it well into what they believe. Your surface level reading is, it makes enough sense. And I agree. It makes enough sense. If this is a premise, if we have made contact, or if we found an alien spacecraft landed, the smart thing to do is to establish contact and to research those things. And you'd be an idiot to do anything else. The question is that actually a thing? And you will have staunch defenders and opponents who will speak their truths and expect you to flip on a dime when they're the ones speaking. So, as neutrally as I can say right now, I have an opinion. We'll get there. We'll build up to it.
Yeah.
So, right now, listeners, viewers, what you're seeing is from an aerial photograph of the Area 51 site. That lake right there is known as Groom Lake. It's a dry lake bed. Forever ago, it used to have water in it. So this space is known by these two names, Groom Lake being one, the other being Homey Airport. And homie meant something a little different back in the day. Didn't really look that up, but it's definitely not your homies where you're going to hang out with them in the middle of the Nevada wasteland. So, you all right there, buddy? You already breaking?
Yeah, I mean, in the list of things I didn't know that I needed in my life, hearing you say the word homie was definitely an unexpected part of that list. So
I'm a gift to my people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the base was established in 1955 inside of Nevada, which, due to Nevada's immense size and lack of habitable regions, has many such bases and areas of governmental control across its lands. A lot of it is free for people to go across, but there are specific regions like this where no one is allowed except for direct personnel. So for frame of reference, for those of you who need maps like me, this is about 83 miles northwest of Las Vegas. It was definitively responsible for being the testing grounds for things like the U-2 spy planes that caused that incident in 1960 when they were shot down for the first time. These were intended as a way for us to spy on other nations, traveling at far greater distances. I think like commercial aircraft flew at 20,000 feet, and the best at the time, other than this, flew at 40,000. I want to say I read this went to 60,000. So radar wasn't tracking that in the same way as everything else. That's why we were using it in that way. It was perfect for that. And these planes were known at the time for also being responsible for UFO sightings. That's one thing that Project Blue Book did mention later on, not to the people they were talking to, but when they would get some of these sightings, some of them were these planes being spotted because they were up so high. They were so different. And they would cross-reference some of the UFO sightings they saw against where these planes were being flown, and they would know, okay, that's what they saw, at least according to them. So later the base would be involved with the Oxcart program that led to the creation and testing of the Lockheed A-12 plane. It is still in use today, as I recall. The base itself was not officially recognized until 1998, which, I mean, this is 10 years after, well, pretty much 10 years after, like, it first gets known in the public consciousness. So, like, okay, guys, it's real, okay? It's real. Not the way you think it is, or at least that's what their official statement is, but it's real. And the CIA officially declassified documents on the things I mentioned earlier about them working on these experimental planes to the American people in 2013. So there has been some government disclosure, but is it real? Is it actually? Are they telling the whole truth? That's the question I'm going to be asking tonight. So anything you want to add, Jeb, before we move on? Smack my microphone.
So you have this testing facility that you know, I think this is a perfect example of enough truth to satisfy while still being able to play the game of two truths and a lie, figure out which one the lie is. I don't think anybody who has ever heard me speak would be horribly surprised to hear that I don't put a lot of faith in humanity. I just don't. And I think that the idea of a unified group or collection of nations all coming together with the self-interest of the planet and keeping quiet the idea of aliens. The only way to keep a secret is for there not to be two people. That's it. That's that's the only way to keep a secret. Like eventually the secret will come out. And so the question then becomes, at what point does the lie enter the conversation? That's where I would change the frame up personally. I don't know as though you can dispute the fact that there is something other than whole and complete truth at play, but just what does that mean? Because when you look at the grand total of what it means to say I believe in ancient astronaut theory, or I believe in extraterrestrials, or something along those lines, and you say I believe that Area 51 is a government testing facility that tests extraterrestrial tech and all of this kind of stuff, and like let's say you go full bore. The problem is you are cooperating in the same in the same space as names like Eric Von Daniken. And you're playing in spaces that are shrouded in so much misappropriation of cultures. Lack of fundamental understanding of historical events, and so and that then spans all the way across to cooperating in the same space as things like racism and stuff like that, like very, very, very racist people. And so in order to try and redeem at least part of the conversation, you need to start pulling some of these strands apart as best you can to at least start to ask the question, can I articulate this in a way that actually divorces what other people have done to the subject and gets to a root issue enough that I can start to make statements or at least make conjecture that I can stand behind without cooperating with something that I can't stand behind. And that was something for me before even actually thinking through the political statements of it, the humanitarian statements of it, the sociological statements of it. I needed to be able to separate out some of those pieces, because when you look into something like Ancient Aliens, right? When you look into chariots in the sky, chariots of fire, chariots
of the gods,
chariots of the gods. When you read that, when you start to look into that stuff and all of that, and again, I would say that I hate to pick on him, but he deserves it. Like, I don't know what else to say about the guy. Like, if you've ever listened to anything like ancient people from other part of world too stupid to be able to build thing is the premise of 3/4 of what he stands on, is essentially that. And so you then have to say, okay, it's you got to treat it like any other kind of large scale problem and say, okay, how am I going to approach this from a level that doesn't include how other people have mishandled it, or to the other side, when now we're starting to talk about a government testing facility. Would the government do this? Would the government screw up in a large and gigantic way? Again, nobody's going to be incredibly shocked or wonderfully astounded to hear the fact that you are not going to necessarily ever hear me screaming the Star Spangled Banner from the top of my lungs. and so which makes the fact that Christian and I co-host a live stream together just an act of the spirit. That's all I'll say. So you for me, I then have to check my bias at the door if I'm actually thinking about this, right? And I'm trying to come to a conclusion of what do I actually believe about these things. I got to check some of my bias at the door and say what actually logically makes sense and isn't steeped in my own perspective. And unfortunately, I'm not sure, like for me, it looks like anti-patriotism. For other people, it may look like being very easily convinced of a conspiracy theory or having trouble separating fact from fiction. You know what I mean? And all of that sort of stuff. Like, you have to be willing to check those things at the door if you're going to make an actual accurate assessment. And unfortunately, even thus far in the conversation, before really even kicking the can around, you already have to kind of acknowledge the fact that this, folks, this is where the bloom falls off the rose. This is where the cart goes off the tracks, and this is really the point where you're just going to go off in the left field most of the time when you start to have a conversation about whether or not Area 51 was a thing, Roswell was a thing, aliens are a thing, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, after that 10-minute monologue, my response is...
What you have me for? You don't tee me up to go on 10-minute long monologues. That's what I bring to the show.
You know what? That's exactly why you're here. Because I love hearing you speak about a myriad of topics. And I agree completely when it comes to the ancient aliens thing. And when it comes to the UFO camp in general.
Yeah.
There are factions within the community that you got to be careful about associating with. You've got to be careful about giving a voice.
Yep.
You know, American, I bleed red, white, and blue. Sometimes people need to shut up, and maybe they don't deserve the right to speak. Maybe they don't deserve the right to the assembly. Sorry, get a little fascist there. When it comes to my ufology,
TLDR, the ufology, the subject of ufology brings the fascist out in Christian. Okay, cool. All right.
Yep. And sometimes it'd be like the one good time you hear someone says that brings out the fascist when you're talking about the ufology community.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are people out there, very bad eggs, who have preconceived notions about race to begin with, and like the ancient aliens thing. Some people legitimately look at that and say, well, it couldn't be possible without, some greater technology. And they genuinely believe that. It has nothing to do with thinking that some race is just too stupid to do that. But there's always that hidden little asterisk there. You go, they couldn't make the pyramids. They couldn't, construct Machu Picchu without alien help because they were not white.
There's a European influence that you have to be honest about, but also I'm not a fan of painting every single solitary person with the same brush just on the opposite side of the fence. I think that's a danger, and we need to make sure that we are distinguishing between folks that have, I guess at this point, just never been exposed to the fact that a people at that time couldn't have done it has been debunked 3 ways from Sunday, but some people just are not exposed to some pieces of information. And we need to be honest about that and make sure that we're not villainizing a group of people, but being honest about an aspect of the conversation.
Absolutely. That's why I like to think of myself as a rational person. I know there are some days when that's not true. So I like to think of Joe as a very rational person, someone who will challenge me on the things I think in a very Joe way. Some people are more loving. Joe's love is to be aggressive, and that's what I love about him. He's He's that bulldog chasing after the car. It's got to rip the wheels and say, no, stop moving, car. We have to talk about what you just said. It's perfect. And like, that's why we work so well together, is because I understand that now after having worked with you before. It's like, because some people that the wheel gets bitten off and the tires pop and they go, does he hate me?
Yep.
Does he think I'm an idiot? Oh, well, sometimes maybe a little. But for the most part, it's because you're passionate.
Yes.
And this is something that obviously brings out that passion, in that there are people who would misrepresent scientific and historical facts for their arguments, some of whom are doing it for bad reasons.
Yep.
And so we need to spin a divide between the people who are doing it for false reasons and those who legitimately believe in it because, well, they just read it in a book and they think it might be true.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have no, I would not fault somebody who approaches this with a pre-existing bone to pick with the government.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to fault a person just on that point alone. And so I see that driveway up to the point, but the issue becomes if you're just navigating this topic based off of that solely, and you're not coupling that with a grounded perspective of reality, or folks, believe it or not, this is me contained.
You have no idea.
So, and or if you come in with an inherent belief that some group of people is superior than another, then something like this, because there is so much white paper, because there is so much blank space on the page for you to color whatever picture you want, it becomes a lot easier to fill it with those things, even if those things are kind of underneath the surface. I think sometimes things become palatable because of where we're raised, because we're what we're used to hearing and all of that kind of stuff. And we haven't consciously made a choice to say, because these people were not of European descent, we are going to think that they are lesser than, even if that series of thoughts never cognizantly went through. If you've been institutionalized to think something specific, then as long as you trust the people who have told it to you, you're a lot less likely to question those things. And that's just the reality of human beings. They're not necessarily great at challenging biases or preconceived notions. And thus, I think that's why we get so many wild takes and so many extravagant, routines to try and fit as much into this idea of ancient astronaut theory, and say, like, because I've watched the routine that tries to use the Bible. I've seen people try to use the Quran. I've seen people try to use ancient Egyptian theories, or Greek or Roman. Like, it's not exclusive to a misuse of one specific thing, or even an incorporation of a specific thing. I'll try to be even more charitable and not go straight for misuse, but a squint and cock your head and suddenly you've got something that to you makes sense. Again, not everybody has a tether to a grounded sense of reality, and that's okay, I guess.
Yeah. And we're talking about ancient aliens, but it comes up in this story too, why we would bring that up. So, like, it's just part of the whole plethora of things that come into ufology community. You've got your ancient aliens people, you've got your anti-government people, so on and so forth. You got people who believe they're here amongst us and they're in control. And so you've got to navigate through all these different factions and figure out, okay, how can we actually have a rational conversation about this, where ideas are submitted, and bad ones are thrown out of the building. That does not always happen in these discussions. I think that's why, especially Joe, is really harping on this right now, because he's probably been there one too many times. So I heartily agree there. Well, 30 minutes in, Joe, do you want to talk about Area 51?
Yeah. Well, so you have to, I think, set the table with all of that stuff to then get to this mythologized thing that is this weird piece of American history, right? Because so much of this and so much of ufology is centered around campfire tales, recall, right, from people's memories, from if half of what is talked about sometimes is accurate, extreme situations and circumstances. And so not only do you have this whole thing that is centered around, that is prime ground for people to pour into, you have this spot in American history that, as we talk about, is going to you're gonna find a lot of this comes down to a handful of people that are recalling their own experiences or own situations to try and lend some kind of credence to this topic,
Yes. There's multiple people who have their Area 51 stories. I'm focusing specifically tonight on Bob Lazar as the one who pretty much is a whistleblower if this is the actual case. So I will throw that his way as maybe something positive, if any of this is true at all. So over the years, there have been, after these things came out, because nobody knew about Area 51 until then, many had wondered, like, what was being conducted inside of there? With theories ranging, where there's intergalactic contact, where the Majestic 12 meet up to interact with these aliens who are working alongside us. Or we've actually found alien craft and we're reverse engineering them, and that's how we have the technology of today. You also just have people who think they're just experimenting on the environment. There's no aliens at all, and it's just military budgets going overloaded to try and find new ways to conduct war. And there are just others who just think it's simply a clandestine military base. I mean, could it be that simple? We'll throw it out as a possibility. We'll see. So, in the year 1989, after the events of what I said in the opening crawl there, Bob Lazar, a self-proclaimed physicist, and I'll explain what I mean by that later, there's not a dig at him specifically yet, broke the news to a Las Vegas TV station, KLAS, that he had been employed in Area 51, specifically the region of the base known as S4, as well as part of the Nellis Air Force Base, which, as I explained earlier, was housed in an aircraft hangar inside of a mountain. His job was to reverse engineer an alien craft that had crash landed in America. He claimed that the occupants of that craft were child-sized and the controls of the craft were built for smaller frames. This is your typical great alien appearance would be the big head, small, lanky body that is maybe 4 feet tall at the highest, unless they're the super jack grays that sometimes appear in people's abduction stories. So in his studies of the craft, he discovered it seemed to have been made out of some form of liquid titanium, at least in appearance, or at least that's what he could equivocate in his mind as something we knew about. It had a working antimatter drive inside of it, which was fueled by the, at the time, undiscovered atomic element 115. This element wouldn't be discovered by contemporary science until 2003, and would later be named Moscovium because it was found by scientists in Moscow, named after that city. Potentially, as far as the research I've done, which you probably shouldn't trust because it involves high-level science that has math in it, it could be possible to use the element as he describes, but all the testing that we've done on it in this moment in time have been inconclusive as to how it could probably be utilized, because if you don't know, these are what's the one I'm looking for? Artificial elements, in a sense, created specifically in a lab under specific conditions, and these elements normally don't survive, as much as an element can be said to survive the experience.
Right.
So that's as much as we've been able to find out about it that I have found. Anything you want to add before we move on?
No, that's it.
Okay. So officially, Lazar has never been employed at Nellis Air Force Base, which has been backed up by the Air Force themselves. Now, some would point to this as a sign of wiping him from the records to discredit his testimony. They would say the same about his claims that he was a student at Caltech and MIT. And this has been one of those things that's been kind of brought up. Well, no wonder no one says he went there, because they wiped him from the records because he's speaking the truth, which I will throw it out as a possibility. If there is someone doing this right now who actually experienced these things and the government doesn't want him to be seen as someone competent who knows what he's talking about, well, of course you'd wipe the records and discredit everything you'd ever done. Now, you could argue that's arguing from an absence of evidence, which I would understand as well. But that's what we've got. So, as well, I forgot to put this in the outline, but he had been asked a couple of times what other students he knew, what other professors he knew on those campuses. And out of those, only one knew him, and he didn't work at either one of those. So it's another point against, in my opinion, but we'll keep that for right now. So he said, as part of his working there, that he had discovered that Earth had been visited by aliens for over 10,000 years. So we do get a little into ancient astronauts through that say. Because of that time in civilization, well, 8,000 years ago, depending on your views of Atlantis, that might be around right now. Other than that, no higher level civilizations that we are aware of. So these aliens were your typical grays and originated from the Zeta Reticuli star system, which, for listeners of, goodness gracious, I forgot the name of the show, Friday Night Frights, would know. The last time I did ufology, we did the Betty and Barney Hill case. And some ufologists and astronomers who had looked at the star system that she drew proposed Zeta Reticuli as being the one that she saw during the midst of her abduction. Is that actually a connection? Probably not. I just thought it was interesting. Now, later on, he and a couple of other people speculated that the Roswell crash of 1947 was where the crafts and bodies came from, and helped bring that in. As a result of some of what he said and what other authors had to say, that brought that more into the public consciousness. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it should be noted, the Roswell case itself was not considered a huge UFO event where people just were clamoring to go to Roswell, New Mexico, which no one had ever done in the history of the world until this point in time, until 1980 with the release of the publication of the Roswell incident.
Yep.
Now, Lazar himself, as just a description of the man, what he does, he was arrested in 1990, so 1 year after he made his initial claims, for working alongside a prostitution ring, aiding and abetting them. He, I even believe he was said to participate in it. I don't know. He got to plead down the charge to where he just had to do community service instead of a massive amount of jail time, which is what it would have been. And I'm guessing this wasn't in Vegas, it's going to be Nevada, because prostitution is legal there, isn't it?
I thought there was something a little more nuanced than it. It's just blanket legal.
I think it's
but
like
I don't remember.
Official brothels or something. I'd have to look it up
Something
again. I'm
like
not a lawyer. Yeah. Later on in 2006, as part of the company he owned with his wife, he was charged with allowing hazardous materials across state lines. That's a big no-no. He got a very small fine, comparatively speaking, only $7,500. But it could have easily been a lot worse. Now, him being a criminal does not discredit everything he has said before now. That is not how logic works. That is not how the law works. But it certainly doesn't help his case, is what I will say on that matter.
Right.
Joe, do you have any opinion before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, no, you cannot draw a distinct and direct and line and all of that kind of stuff. But I'm just saying, like, I feel like I would feel differently about this subject if these weren't the type of people that were the ones that were championing everything that's like all of this is real, and it's coming from a guy like this who doesn't necessarily have a stellar reputation and all of that kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like I said, it doesn't help.
Yeah.
He's the one saying that there is no record of him having a degree from any of these prestigious organizations or knowing anyone there. The Air Force claims they don't know him, which, if you're more conspiracy minded, and I wouldn't blame a person for going this way, that makes sense once again, because, well, if you don't want someone like him to be accredited, you just
Right.
mark him from the record.
Yeah, that's
But
where I need to be careful for myself of, like I talked about before, the whole idea of having a an awareness of my bias, that I need to be just remain critical of every single angle, just critical thinking skills around every aspect of it, because it would be very easy for me to say, "Oh, so you mean to tell me that the government covered something up? This is my shocked face. This is me shocked." You know what I mean? Like that sort of thing, without
yes,
just then allowing that to keep guiding me into jumping feet first into, oh, then that means the whole thing is real because the government would have of cleaned the whole thing up, which means there's actually aliens and all of that.
yeah, yeah, it's a fine line to walk down, and I understand both points of view. I lean
Same.
towards him not being who he says he is,
Yeah.
but I don't discredit that out of hand in a world where, government agencies can wipe people from the records whenever they please
Yep.
and face no repercussions for it because there's not as much oversight as there needs to be.
Right.
So I do not begrudge anyone who believes that. Do you have anything else to say about the man himself before we move on?
No, I mean, it's just again, I think that it's a prime example of just be discerning. You know, when you're reading through these things, this is one of those subjects where um, the mystique is helped by the lack of technology to be able to document things at the time. The lack of documentation of law or accessible documentation of the validity of people's claims or statements about themselves or different things like that. And so you have somebody who is proven to have less than honorable morals by a standard perspective, that immediately then calls into question the validity of his other statements too. And so it's not the smoking gun that says aliens don't exist or none of this is real, but it's certainly something to consider when looking at the wide scope of things. So just remain critical. That's all.
Yeah. And we do have a comment from Matthew Winter. At work right now. We'll watch later, but I can't help it. I got a notification that said Bob Lazar swag licked. All right, you get back to work, Matthew. Make that money for your family. So, yeah, I agree. It's one of those things when you before you do your research on this, you kind of go, well, of course, yeah, it's just real. People said it was, and yeah, there's multiple people who say it, and then you actually look into who these people are, at least the official record, and you go, I don't know. You started off pretty hot with what you're saying because it sounded good. But then I look into actually who you are, what you've done, and I will say, it is not wrong for someone to make money off of an experience that they've had.
No.
If they have seen a ghost, or there's been a haunting, or they saw the Loch Ness monster, or a UFO, make your dime off it, brother. Like, you know who can't tell that story? Someone who didn't see it, or someone who didn't come up with the idea. That in itself does not disqualify someone, in my mind, of being dishonest just because they're making money off of it.
Yeah, no.
Hey, look, we're in America. Capitalism is our thing.
Yeah, it's a free market, and so, like it or not, it's a free market. It's a world that we live in, and so if it's something that you turn in your favor, okay. The problem is that it's in a lot of ways, it's a non-starter, because both the honest person and the dishonest person both have access to a free market. And so that being the judgment of whether or not, like, you cannot, insufficient data, you cannot make an accurate assessment based off of whether or not they're making a dime. And I would argue it's still enough of a non-starter that even that, coupled with somebody being chronically dishonest, for lack of a better phrase, that's not, it's still just, okay, so I'm, again, honest or dishonest, you both have access to an open market. So I agree with you wholeheartedly that again, keep driving. If you're interested in this thing and you're trying to say, what do I actually believe is true about this, or what, to the best of my assessment, can I say? If you're looking to wade through these waters well, then again, I would say keep swimming then, because you haven't actually made it to a destination. You still are looking at the grand total of the seascape that's in front of you as you're trying to land in a spot.
Yeah. Well said. So moving on from there to something a little more funny. We mentioned it a little earlier. We had the entire incident. We have to talk about it. It's Area 51 in 2019. I remember when 2019 was a thing 5 years ago. You know, the pre-COVID times.
No, the answer is actually no. I don't really remember that. The last 5 years are just one giant blur. That's all. Anyway,
the older I get, it's more like, oh, that happened in what year again?
Did that happen? Yeah.
Where was I?
Yeah. I used to be able to equate it with places that I've lived, but I've lived enough places that even that's unreliable at this point.
So a popular meme and eventual following occurred known as Storm Area 51 that was started with the slogan, Storm Area 51, they can't stop all of us.
Yep.
Now, this did create some music festivals along the way that at their peak may have had around 3,000 people.
Yeah.
Of the people who actually went to Area 51, there were 150. But only 7 of them got near the base and were promptly arrested for trespassing on a military base. Surprise, surprise. No matter how much Naruto running was done, as you look in the official, the government had to look up what Naruto running was as a result of this meme.
Yeah.
Which to this day is one of the funniest things. We wasted taxpayer money on this.
Yeah. Absurd. Absurd.
Glorious.
But the thing that gets me about it is the people who show up to be a part of history in the most asinine sense possible. That's one group of people. Then there's another group of people who showed up thinking that they were going to storm the White House, or not the White House, Area 51.
That's its own separate issue.
That's its own conversation. We're not touching that one today, folks. Somebody somewhere just got. Yeah, some person somewhere just got real excited that we were shifting gears to an entirely different conversation. Anyway, yeah. So it's one of those things that you just got to look at the collective. The collective nonsense of humanity, and if my lack of confidence in humanity could ever be summed up into a single meme, there you go, there you go. You know,
they can't stop us all.
Yeah.
And now I'm getting angry at myself because I just realized I used the wrong there in the outline. So if anyone needs to be outraged, it's over that.
Yep.
Okay. So we've established what the base may or may not be, who was involved. So if these things are actually true, let's go over what could possibly be happening here. So alien experimentation and cooperation. How does that ring to you as a possibility here?
If it's true, then it's the single greatest kept secret that I could imagine. If it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Do I think that it is possible? Oh, some really weird stuff has happened in the course of human history, so I guess a whole great many things are possible. Probable? Not even a little bit. Not even. So you mean to tell me a whole bunch of people with far too much power than they should ever have got together and said, we're going to keep the secret for the betterment of mankind? Oh, I don't think so, Tim. Are you high, or did you just fall off the turnip cart? Like, what? Are you serious? You know what I mean? Like, that's that. I don't. I, if it's true, then you're talking about a systematic series of safeguards to keep this classified and under wraps to the point where people, a plurality of people, need to be smartened up to the fact that this existed. Now, granted, if we're going this route, then I think you need to allow into the conversation all of the stuff about government cover-ups and all of that kind of stuff. So if we're going that route and you're looking at the idea of for threat of safety and things like that, well, threats can do a great many things. They can quiet a great many people. Money can quiet a great many people. But the question that I have to ask when you're starting to employ whether or not this is possible is how big. At what point does the gymnastic routine become too much? At what point are we just manufacturing larger and larger stories and narratives to try and suit and fit the overarching narrative? You know what I'm saying? Like, at what point are we just creating larger and more fanciful stories to try and retrofit the thesis statement that aliens exist?
I just love early in what you had to say. That there, somewhere deep inside of Joe, is an optimist, an idealist who believes that this is done for the sake of humanity.
Yeah,
I'm going to crush that optimist. I'm going to murder him right here. It's like, no, it's not done for the sake of humanity, you fool. It's done for the sake of the United States of America expanding their power. That's why this would exist. There is no cooperation. There's nothing for the greater good. It's done so we can get an edge on everyone else. And that's why we have to keep it under wraps, because we want to get the aliens only talking to us. We can't have them talking to the commies, even though they're not commies anymore. They're just the Russians, and they're not really much better off now. But yeah, we can't have them talking to China. They got to come to us because we are the ones who recovered the craft. We had to establish diplomatic relations with them. And if you say otherwise, you're just part of the problem, man.
You're just part of the problem. Yeah. So you know, guys, I've tried to turn over a new leaf and be more charitable in my statements, because I've been known to be a little, I don't know, heavy-handed. Some people may even say slightly obnoxious. Those people are wrong, but so yeah, I mean, do I see a world where somebody somewhere has a power play in place where they are the ones that hold all of the cards on keeping this safe and keeping this quiet, so that way America is the only one who has this information? Do I think that level of greed exists in America, and that level of deception in America exists? Do I? You know what I mean? Like, yes. But at what point then at what point then does logic start to enter into the conversation? You know what I mean? Because I think in order to reason your way through this, you have to hit logic. And logic says something very, very specific about the entirety of this situation. So the question then becomes, do I finally let it out? Do I finally allow for everybody to know my stance on whether or not I think that there were little gray men or little green men or alien spaceships or anything else like that? I think if you allow yourself to reason through, okay, so you mean to tell me one instance happened and they were able to keep it covered up, and that was the only instance that's ever happened? Because now all bets are off. You're talking about a different point in time where not everybody had a camera in their pocket. But I don't know who remembers. I don't remember what year it was, but I know it was in a post YouTube world where a meteor shower or something like that started happening, and I believe it was Russia, and rocks were legit falling from the sky.
Yeah,
like that was everywhere within minutes of that thing. Like, if anybody sees this thing, you guarantee it's ending. The footage will land someplace. So you need to then say that this was the only instance of this happening, and that they were able to that nothing modern happened, or that the powers that be are so powerful that they're still covering these things up even to today. Oh, I don't have that much faith or confidence in humanity to be able to do that, nor do I necessarily think that people will ever be, because that greed that we're saying exists within America. Somebody is going to break rank and say, I'm going to be greedy enough to be the whistleblower that says this whole thing, and I'm going to jump command and put all of that prestige and all of that fame on myself. Come on, it's humans, people. It's humans that could break the whole thing wide open. You're talking about people who have lived on this earth, that we have seen people straight up say, I will put myself at risk of the most clandestine groups known to man and start blowing the whistle on things. We've seen that. That's been a thing. Some people think he's a patriot. Other people think he's a criminal. Whatever you think about it, it's happened. We've watched that happen. So you mean to tell me that nobody within the alien okay. That, friends, that is too tall a tale for me to be able to accept. I don't know. There's this theory, right? That if in the sum total of the expanse of the cosmos, if we have not seen intelligent life or signs of intelligent life, then the probability is that it simply just doesn't exist. And I'm sorry, guys, but the numbers to me don't look good in credibility towards this being anything more than a Black Ops site that was probably testing something having to do with the Cold War or another dispute or something where we want to, as Americans, hold our cards close to the vest, just not aliens.
So how much did Mr. Joe Biden pay you to say all that? Yeah.
I plead
okay. I agree with your points. Is it possible there is one group out there devoted to this idea? We cannot disclose. We have to keep this secret. The world isn't ready. And we will threaten everyone's family so that this secret does not come out. No one will make a dime on it. I believe that could be a thing. Is it about aliens? We'll get there, but we have other things to discuss. So, we brought it up earlier. This is, as far as the government has said, a physically disclosed, been used for military experimentation, specifically with aircraft. One of the reasons being that lake we mentioned earlier made for a natural airfield to just land their planes. So, is this simply it? Is that all there is to this place, Joe?
I would say, yeah, testing, like a testing facility for aircrafts, tech, other things like that. That, yeah, I mean, I see no evidence outside of conjecture to say that it's anything more than just a testing facility.
Okay, I'll agree, but for a different reason I'll reveal later on.
Okay.
I think this is precisely what Area 51 is used for. It is a bunch of, hey, we are the biggest military spending budget company in the country in the entire world. Freudian slip, sorry, where we will throw everything at this problem to see how we come up as number one. We made the U2s. We made the A12s. There are things there right now being used for our military being developed that we will not know for maybe 10 or more years down the line, because they don't want us to know, because they want to keep that advantage against other nations. Like, we're the strongest military power on the planet. We have the world's greatest Army, Navy, Air Force, and then the Air Force is doubled because it's also part of the Navy. And don't even get into the numbers. It's big. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Of course there's a place like this. And of course they don't want people to come in because they don't want other people to know what they're doing. The same thing that happened in Los Alamos, whatever the heck it was, for the nuclear bombs. And still people came in because the Russians found out about it and other people found out about it. So there is precedence in American history for this to be a thing. I think Area 51 is solely for the development of military experimentation and technologies.
Yeah.
So one that we didn't really focus on, but I did see a couple people bring up as speculation, is that aliens smoke screen. What they're actually doing there is they're trying to find ways to control the weather and conduct time travel tests. We've got the Philadelphia experiment going on in Nevada as we speak right now. Joe, your take.
I think that's been a line item in some R&D department for a very long time, because the theory of light manipulation has been a thing for a very long time, really since we saw the explosion of quantum theory in the 60s. I believe it was the 60s. So it's been something that has been around for some time. So possible, the whole weather manipulation thing, I put that in the same camp as the whole alien thing. Like, I think my brother in a completely separate conversation, but mentioning part of the larger conversation was talking about how we are of a generation where we can't quite put our finger on it, and we're not willing to necessarily use all of the identity politics driven labels that tend to float around in the subject matter. But there's something just not the same about the weather patterns from when we were kids to now. That it's just different. You know what I mean? Like that, like the seasons seem different, just patterns seem different, the whole 9 yards. And so, is there room in the conversation to talk about a documented shift? Sure. Is there room in the conversation to talk about that being the byproduct of government experiments? As much as it's part of the conversation to talk about the validity of whether or not these things are actually part of a legitimate conversation about like alien life and life on other planets and all of that kind of stuff. Okay, if you're going to talk about these sci-fi concepts, then you have to be willing to have conversation. Now, Your mileage may vary on how far you get within that conversation, but you you can have those conversations. My problem is I've never heard it done in a way that didn't subjugate some group of people. Now, that being said, I do think that there are political statements to be made about the subjugation of certain groups of people in America. I think that's just a true statement to be made. So, do I think that there's some room in the conversation to say that larger government bodies that could want something a certain way would need to eliminate certain brackets of people and all of that kind of stuff? Okay. If we're having a conversation, then we need to leave all points on the table to be able to have a conversation about it. That being said, I just think that it's risky business going too far down those rabbit holes in a way that says I'm going to build whole thought patterns around these things. So time travel, yeah, I actually think that's more. I think that's more
plausible,
likely or plausible than weather manipulation.
Okay. Yeah. I will say, in these regards, if someone is not experimenting with either one of these things right now, they're fools in the American government. And with as much military spending as we have, like, hey, you can look up your old classic MK Ultra. Did we actually find if people were psychic or not? Hey, depends on how you view the results. And the fact that we were researching it all said, someone asked the question, is this a possibility? We have these stories of people able to do this, to remote view different locations and read people's minds. And if that's a thing that actually exists in the world and you are not researching how to develop it or utilize it as a military power, that's a foolish thing to do. So yeah, MK Ultra, at least what's been disclosed, was not exactly the biggest success story in the world, but you don't think they're doing it right now again? You don't think there's someone out there who's experimenting with these ideas because we've had time travel as something in the public consciousness since H.G. Wells in the 1890s, I believe is when he published that one. Like, of course, we're researching something like that. So Is it an Area 51? I mean, they've already done military experimentation there before. I mean, I'll throw that as plausible. I'm not going to take a bullet for that one, but I might take a non-fatal one. All right. Then we get our final one, unless you have something else you want to add.
Nope, good.
Okay. The idea is that Area 51 is not actually where these things are happening. It is actually a smokescreen for the true location. The names vary. Some people will be really inventive and just say Area 52. Other people will just give it some other name that just sounds clandestine and spy-y. What are your opinions on this, Joe?
I don't think that they would keep the cookie jar where everybody would be looking for the cookie jar. I just don't. I think that you have a giant sign over top of this thing that says, come look here for nonsense and strange things and all of that sort of stuff. Sure, you could. The natural retort to that is hide it in plain sight. Okay, yeah. I could absolutely hear that argument. Sure. Do I think that they've gone as far as to put some kind of marketing plan to try and keep people thinking about Area 51 while they're doing things over here? No, I do not think that is the case at all. But I would think that there would be people who would say, like, if there was something to hide, okay, if people think that it's over here, cool, we're hanging out over here. We don't need to do anything to make you think that, like, and overemphasize this. We're not going to put our money towards that, but we're hanging out over here while you think we're hanging out here. All right. That part of it. Yeah, I could definitely see that.
This is what I believe completely and utterly. This thing right here, Area 51, it's a false flag. let everyone look this way. And while we're all pointing and looking this way, we're working right over this way. Is there a Area 52 or what have you? I absolutely believe. That's probably not the name for it. Could be any area. Could be 17. Could be 39. Who knows? And it's you put that smoke screen up there and say, look here, look here, look here. And meanwhile, the bad guys are getting away this way. That makes perfect sense.
It does make sense. It does make sense, but it requires a certain level of confidence in the foresight and long-term thinking of the United States government. And when I think of the United States government, the only thing that comes to my mind is a monkey romancing a coconut. Like that's the only thing that comes to my mind. Like I don't know. Like do I think that there are wonderfully smart people who are working for the government? Absolutely. Do I think that there are big complex projects? Absolutely. Do I think there's heavily guarded secrets passed down from generation to generation? Absolutely. I believe that our government has been doing nefarious things since 1793. I'm pulled a. I can't. I'm lost on the date. Escaped my mind. But you guys all are intelligent enough to get the joke that I'm making. But it's all. I'm all for. That aspect of it is a thing. I just don't think that there's that much. I don't put that much stock or confidence that there's that much forethought put into it. If it's a happy accident that people aren't paying attention to where the magic's actually happening, then okay. But I don't necessarily think that people were intelligent enough to be able to put forethought into that.
And how much they pay you for that?
Just part of the payroll. That's
like
all.
Like a true sellout.
Yep.
To the American people. Joe Day, his address is no. I understand your point. But if I am seriously considering this as a real thing, this is where I go.
Yeah, I agree.
I can't imagine they would if maybe there is a world where things were happening here. They realized, the cat's out of the bag. Then they moved elsewhere. I could also believe in something like that.
Yeah.
But I do think there's someone out there who said they've got this huge thing. We had Project Blue Book back in the 60s, stopped in 69, I think, maybe in the early 70s, where they knew Americans were seeing these UFOs. Let's document those cases. Then they said, well, we're going to pull the funding. So the government knows about these things. How much do they know? That's always been the matter of debate.
Right.
So they bring up this idea. Let's give people an outlet for where they think things might be.
Right.
While we're actually doing it over here.
Yeah.
That's if I am seriously considering there are actually experimentations being done on alien spacecraft or actually having negotiations with Gleek glob of the Zeta Reticuli system or what have you, then that's what I think is happening.
Right.
If I accept this as an actual premise in the world.
Yeah, I agree. I would say that if I have to consider one of these, then I would say, that's probably it.
Okay. Well, I kind of, as always, brought up my final judgment for the final judgment section. Is there anything you want to add before we head that way?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Joe, your final judgment.
I think that this is nothing more than just your average run-of-the-mill military experiments. I don't think that it has anything to do with aliens. But if it did, then probably a smokescreen.
Okay. Yeah, I'll second what I said. If there is one out there, it's not the one we think it is. And this is being used as a way of people to go, look that way instead of this way. Yeah. I believe there's enough evidence out there to question official sources about what they have done there, what they haven't done there, and that any rational government, if they met alien life or were contacted by alien life and they knew about it, would choose to be in clandestine contact with them, most likely not because they're afraid of how people would react, but because of what they could gain from them to help get more power. So if that were a thing, I can totally believe that. Now, as far as Bob Lazar is concerned, I think he's a shyster. He's kind of the Ed and Lorraine Warren of the UFO world, in my opinion. Actually, you know what? I actually like Ed and Lorraine Warren more. I think they were shysters who thought they were doing some good in the world.
Yeah.
Him, on the other hand, I think this is motivated by money and to be known as someone. So he's been a very disreputable witness as far as how he's conducted himself in public, and as well his criminal background. Once again, that's not enough to prove that everything they said before is wrong, but it certainly doesn't help their case. And he has provided not much of his actual schooling background, which is why I have my appellation down there as definitely has a degree from MIT, because if he can say it, I can say it. So I just don't believe him.
Right.
All right.
Yep, I think that's fair.
Yeah. And with that, what do you believe, dear listeners and viewers? Is Area 51 real? Have we actually made contact with aliens who have gifted us with their technology? Or did we start by reverse engineering from a crash? We didn't touch everything that history and folklore have on the subject tonight, so let us know in the comments below if there's something you'd like us to do a follow-up on. In the description below as well, you can find the sources used for tonight's program. I just think I had one because I did not want to buy Dreamland for the price they were suggesting. I'm not giving Lazar my money. So next time in July, we are flipping things up. And Joe is actually going to be the host one for this. As we go back to the beginning of our list, we're doing cryptozoology. And it's not only that, it's going to be Christmas in July, discussing the Yule Cat of Icelandic folklore.
Yep. Super excited.
Oh, yeah. So thank you guys for everything you do. Please leave a like and subscribe. Love having you here. Love having people comment as we're streaming these things. Thank you for all that you do. So until next time, see ya.